Good, it's recording. In this video, I want to talk about Negroland. This is a part of history that's often neglected in the schools or many just don't know about it. So I'm going to inform you about it, okay? Negroland. If you zoom in, I'm going to do that for you. You will see here, Kingdom of Judah. Or they call it the Ouija Slave Coast. Here's where the Portuguese came when they began their transatlantic slave trade. Kingdom of Judah. Does that come from the tribe of Judah? That's correct. Now, I'm going to give a bit of history lesson in this video. I'm going to go through it very quickly. And I'll begin over here. During the Old Testament times, after the death of King Solomon, the Israelite kingdom was divided into the 10 tribes in the north and the tribe of Judah, with of Benjamin in the south. Okay? After the Assyrian captivity, this kingdom, this country ceased to exist because those 10 tribes here were scattered all over the earth. Now, I'm not going to talk about those tribes in this video. I'm going to talk about the kingdom of Judah, which had the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. They remained until the Babylonian captivity. And the Babylonian captivity happened in two phases. You had the first invasion, and you had the second invasion. After the second invasion, this kingdom ceased to exist. After the first invasion, the Most High commanded the prophet Jeremiah to instruct the Israelites that were deported to Babylonia to increase both in number, so to keep marrying, having children, but also increase financial, economically by planting vineyards, building houses, so that they would increase and not decrease. And the Most High made plain unto them that His plan for them were plans to do them well and not to harm them, to give them a hopeful future. This was written in Jeremiah 29 verse 11. Then you had the second invasion, which led to the end of the kingdom of Judah. And now the whole Judean tribe, well, except some refugees that fled to Ethiopia, were now in Babylonia. Now, this deportation of the Judean people led to the exhaustion of the treasury of the Babylonian Empire. So Emperor Nebuchadnezzar thought he was being a tough man by deporting the Judean people, but by doing that, first of all, the land that was left behind was unoccupied. So who would bring produce to the land? Okay, only the poorest were left behind, and the refugees fled to Ethiopia. But the majority of the Judean tribe was now in Babylon. That was a big project to transport all those people. And you also had military men from Babylon to transport the money or the gold and silver from Jerusalem to Babylon. I mean, you didn't have trains back then, you didn't have airplanes and all that, so you had to use camels or horses to drag all those people and much of the stolen wealth to Babylon. This exhausted the Babylonian administration, which eventually led to the collapse of the Babylonian Empire. The Babylonian Empire was at its height when Nebuchadnezzar invaded Judah, but in his arrogance, or better said, in the arrogance of the Babylonian people, they destroyed themselves. Now don't get me wrong, the generations of Judeans that lived in the kingdom of Judah back then were very wicked. I've spoken about it before. They didn't want to live with the Most High, and they were sacrificing their children unto pagan gods. The Most High allowed them to be deported to Babylon because the Most High knew that this action by the Babylonians would exhaust them and eventually led to their demise. While the Most High, through the Judean people that kept multiplying, would continue His plan for human history. Now that happened. After 70 years, those 70 years did not begin with the second invasion, they began earlier. After 70 years, of the first deportation, the prophet Nehemiah led the rebuild of Jerusalem. And by doing this later, the Judeans returned back to their homeland and they expelled the foreigners, because under the Medo-Persian Empire, each dynasty had their own territory and you had to remain in your own territory. So after the foreigners were expelled and the Judeans now established Judea, their homeland, you had those half Judeans that were around but were not allowed to partake in the politics and economy of Judea. They became known as Samaritans. Okay? Samaria was the capital of the former kingdom of Israel, which ceased to exist after the Assyrian captivity. So those Judeans, because the Judeans that returned to the land had to divorce foreign wives and leave their children with foreign wives behind, so all of them were gathered in the north and remained in the district of Samaria. Now those people were Judeans, but they were a sub-ethnicity of Judah. So the Judeans, or better said, Judeans in the south, did not want to consider the Judeans in the north as part of them. So you had ethnic conflict, or you said racial conflict between them. Not biological race, but based on ethnicity. When the Romans took over, or better said, before I go to the Romans, I need to explain the following. When the Medo-Persian Empire was taken over by Alexander from Macedonia, because remember that Macedonia was a kingdom yet, was kingdom already, but the Greeks had city-states all over the Mediterranean, and they also had colonies all over Europe. So the Greeks were more in number than the Macedonians. So King Philip of Macedonia took over the Greek city-states and he established the kingdom of Greece. So his alleged son, Alexander, who we know was a Nephilim, which means he wasn't really his son, Alexander, as king of Macedonia, took over the throne of Greece as a king of Greece. And he used the Greek troops to invade the Medo-Persian Empire, and he established the Greek Empire. The Greek Empire didn't last for long, because Alexander of Macedonia, or Apollo, or Helios, whatever you want to call him, he died. His body died, at least. We know Nephilims don't really disappear, but okay. His human generals divided the Greek Empire in 4 parts, and it continued. But the Greek Empire, man, it was fragmented. Yet in Central Asia, yet Greek kingdoms were established, Greek dynasties. You had the Roman Republic, which was part of the Greek Empire because it was a Greek civilization also that wanted to expand further. So it became chaotic. But nevertheless, since Alexander of Macedonia, you have an Apollonistic world order, or heliocentric world order centered around him that rules the world. That world order is ruling the world right now too. It began in around 300 BC, but was finalized in 200 BC. And one of the generals of Alexander became the Pharaoh of Egypt, and they began to worship him as Serapis. So the worship of white people began right over there with the Greek Empire, because the overwhelming majority of the world's population was woolly-haired with dark skin. White people, Caucasians, were a very tiny minority. Okay? Now, the Judeans were torn between the rivalries within the Greek Empire. So over time, many began to flee. But realize this, the whole world was now in a under heliocentric order. Before that, the pagans that ruled the world were in line with Egyptian gods. Now they were all centered around the Greek god Apollo. And the Greek elite ran the world. So where will you go to escape this Greek elite? Now, the majority of the world's population lived between Italy and Japanese island of Kyushu. Here's where most urban areas were. Here's where most cities were, most trades took place. There were some uh, urban areas here also on the Western Hemisphere, but for the majority, the world took place between Italy and the Japanese island of Kyushu. Now, if you have tens of thousands of people fleeing from a political oppressive climate, where will they go? Well, India was an option, but, well, yet an Apollonistic king that ruled this, well, emperor that ruled this area over here, so that wouldn't be a good idea. Southeast Asia was under the shadow of the Chinese empire that emerged as another Apollonistic stronghold. And to go to the Americas meant you had to build many ships, and that would be quite risky for refugees. You also had the hurricane season also. So the Judeans, when they fled, they many went to Ethiopia. But Ethiopia also had their own dynasties and all of that. So what's the other option? To the west. This area now the Niger River, it was very thin populated, yet much fertile land. You were close to civilization, you only had to get on a ship, follow the shoreline, you would be back in the Mediterranean, and you could also be back to Judea. And it was relatively close to Ethiopia also. Well, close, you still had to spend days traveling by land, but it was there. So many Judeans fled to the Niger Delta. So at the time Christ walked the earth, that's during the Roman Empire. Let's see where I had that. Where is it again? Maybe I lost it, but okay, I'm not going to show the Roman Empire. But during the Roman Empire, oh wait, I can show it here also. There were Judeans in the Niger region and in Judea. So the tribe of Judah was located at two places: in Judea, their homeland, and in around the Niger Delta. All right. After Christ died and rose again, you can read those history of the book of Acts yourself. There was one guy in there who joined the apostles called Niger. And why Niger means black? Now, why do they call the guy black? I mean, the majority of the world's population, and also the majority of the population of the Mediterranean, was dark skinned. So why would they call someone black? The Egyptians were black at the time. But the Egyptians today are a mixture of Arabs with the locals when the Islamic Empire took over. But at the time, those were dark-skinned people, just like the Judeans were. Now, Niger refers to this river, this region over here, of the Niger River. So you had an Judean from this area that came to the Mediterranean. Okay, and by the way, yearly you had Israelite celebrations in Jerusalem, in which Israelites that were scattered all over the world came to celebrate. Also, the Judeans in diaspora. After the crisis of the 60s of the first century, the Judeans revolted against Rome and they established their own separate state. Now, remember what I said in the previous video. Since the Greek Empire, all wars have been hoaxes. There were fights locally, but those fights were orchestrated by the pagan rulers, or we call them the Greek elite, or whatever you prefer. Not all within the Greek elite are from the Greek ethnicity, but it's the Greek elite because they worship the god Apollo. Today they operate behind the scenes, but at the time they operated in plain sight. The Greek elite, when the Judeans revolted, They waited a few years because they knew those Judeans would have a plan. Then they sent a legion to commit genocide on the Judeans. And the genocide happened, and Jerusalem was destroyed. Many of Judeans were left flat. Ethiopia, Western Africa, and also to Western Africa. Since that big genocide, the Judeans, the tribe of Judah, remained in Western Africa and a small portion in Ethiopia, because Judea, or their homeland Palestine, was not their homeland anymore. That was over. That was in the past. So over time, and let me go further. It's in 200 AD. This when the Western Roman Empire collapsed, so it went on in the east. Some shifts happened. When time passed by, Islam arose in the 6th century, and the Mohammedans, as they were called, conquered large land masses. You can see in 750 AD, when they had large land masses already, and Europe was suppressed. Economically, politically, it was suppressed because the Mohammedans, man, they assaulted Europe. But that was in agreement with all the pagan rulers of the world, because all the pagan rulers of the world are worshipping Apollo. So even those mass attacks on Europe, which really happened, were rituals. The population thought they were really under attack, but those were rituals. Blood sacrifices onto Apollo and those other demons. Meanwhile, the Judeans and the Hamites, remember, Africa is a name given to this continent by the rulers of the Greek Empire, which later became the Roman Empire. So the Hamites, as they were officially called, together with the Judeans, they moved on. They grew in numbers. They established towns, cities, countries, you name it. So you have Judean ethnicities or Judean tribes over here, because they grew in number. They were in the millions now. The Hamites were also in the millions, but Africa wasn't that intensely populated. But the shores over here was Judean territory or Negro territory. Okay? When the Portuguese came, now I need to skip a lot of history. When the Portuguese came, they went to the Judean territories, to Judean regions. And over there, they began to kidnap people for their colonies. Now, later, Spain took over. Well, this is a bit further in the future here, but over here. Okay, here. Sorry, guys. Okay, here. When Portuguese came, they needed people for Portuguese America. The population of Portugal was low, too low for their country, and Spain had around 6 to 7 million people, including the Italian parts of Spain back then. You had around 8.8 million people, I think, or around 8 million people. The Portuguese had the Azores, the Canary Islands, the Cape Islands. They were also active in the Caribbean, but since 1494, with the Tratado de Tordesillas, Pope determined Castile, or Spain, had received the majority of the Americas, while Portugal could remain with Africa, this part of the Americas, all the way to the East Indies. Now, the Portuguese established many trade settlements here and there, because they couldn't actually occupy large plots of land because their population was low and their navy wasn't that big. Portugal was quite vulnerable. So for Portuguese America over here, they needed people. They needed to construct roads, build ports, build the marine. But where will they get those people? Well, one option was to get them from Eastern Europe, from the region which they call Russia, and also Ukraine. and all the Baltic states, but those people, they were used often as slaves, but in this warm climate, they weren't that useful. And remember, yeah, the Islamic world that dominated the east of the Mediterranean and also parts around the Black Sea. So to get slaves from the Eastern Europe, well, that was a bit difficult. So the Portuguese began to kidnap people. They didn't begin the kidnappings obviously, they did it covertly. And after a while, it became obvious. They began to kidnap many Negroes or Hebrews or Judeans from Western Africa, and they dumped them in Portuguese America, which was also called Brazil. Brazil was the nickname for Portuguese America, but eventually Brazil became the name of the region. And here you can see it more clearly. Early 1500s, the Portuguese went to Judean territory, kidnap people, often with the aid of Judeans there also, because you have corrupt people everywhere. And they deported them to the Amazon, towards the Amazon River, which was also called the Marañón River. Spain gave the name Marañón, but they also called it Amazon, which refers to to Greek mythology. Remember, the pagan rulers of the world worshiped the Greek god Apollo. But Spain, remember, Spain was not a country, it was a union of kingdoms, divided into administrations, the crown of Castile and the crown of Aragon. Now, Spain established kingdoms in the New World. So you had kingdoms over here, small kingdoms, often in conflict with one another, but they had the same king. They also part of Italy, was part of the Spanish Union. The Dutch revolted eventually, but I'm not talking about that in this video. But Spain established kingdoms over here. For example, you have Nueva Extremadura or New Extremadura. Extremadura is a desert region in Spain and also part of Portugal. So New Extremadura was a territory established by Spain, and they also call it Chile. So they established a kingdom over here. They wanted to establish New Andalusia, but that was later named Venezuela because you also had many Italian Spaniards were involved in the empire, and they had their investments over here. You have, hold on, I did something, hold on a minute. You also had the New Galicia over here, the Galicians, one of the Spanish kingdoms, also became active here. So the Spaniards needed work, needed labor for their kingdoms to maintain all of this. And as I mentioned in the previous video, the Spanish even extended all the way into East Asia. They only came on the Philippines, which is this territory over here. So Spain needed fuel. So eventually, Portugal had to back off so that Spain could take over, and Spain became the port of the Caribbean. That's how the Caribbean became populated with Judeans. But Portugal also kept the port in them towards the Americas. But their way of deportation was quite dumb. Their way of deportation caused the death of almost 90% of all the people they transported by ship. So many died while being deported. And families were torn apart. So for example, a father would be deported to Cuba, a son towards Rio de Janeiro. So people were torn apart. That's how the captors did, which were pagans, which were working for the pagan rulers. So the Judeans became scattered across the Americas. And later the English also became involved as the Dutch. And the English bought them from the Spaniards in the Caribbean. Later, when the 13 colonies became independent, they also kept purchasing them from the Caribbean. But here's the thing. Around 1800, no, not around 1800, a bit later than 1800, Spain was in a crisis. Though to Napoleon, so-called invading the country, and all of that. So now, what happened was that the rulers, the pagans that ran Spain, wanted to establish a Spanish federation. Spain was already considered a nation, because already had a flag since 1785, but now they really want to make it a firm nation. So now they had to determine who was a Spaniard and who wasn't officially. And many of the Judeans, because remember, they weren't just working on plantations, they were also involved in the navy, on the troops on land, involved in administration, involved in business, in the church, in academics. So the Judeans were scattered all over the Americas. In the Spanish territory, the Portuguese territory, the French, Dutch, and also English territory. We also had the Danish and Swedish territories over here also. They were shocked when hearing that they would not be considered Spaniards. Whites from Europe that were not from Spanish heritage would be included as Spaniards. Even people from the east of Europe, for example, or Chinese people that were located there. But the Judeans, whose labor structured the colonies in the Americas, they will be excluded. Now, the Judeans that were scattered here, they were economically powerful, far more powerful than many of the Spaniards or Portuguese realized. So Spain's refusal to include the Judeans in Spanish nationhood, that was not a good move. This also contributed to the fragmentation and the collapse of the Spanish Empire. Now, behind the scenes, the Pink rulers wanted to sacrifice Spanish Empire anyway, but their decision, the decision of the pagans in Spain to exclude the Judeans, was a big mistake. Around 1830, the Spanish Empire was gone. Okay, and it's at the time also that the British wanted slavery to be abolished. Since 1830, the Judeans were scattered. Remember, they spoke Spanish, Portuguese, French, Dutch, Danish, Swedish. Did I mention English already? Okay, but you also had Creole languages that developed like Papiamentu, and all of that. So they also add languages to the map. They moved on. They had their own economy that they developed. And it's 3 decades later that the United States officially banned slavery. Okay? So worldwide, around 1870, slavery was not done anymore. And the transatlantic slave trade only continued by smugglers. But that wasn't done anymore. But look at this. In 1830, when the Spanish Empire was done, it was over, you still had Spanish America, but not a Spanish Empire anymore. It was then that the French became desperate and began to colonize Africa, because the French Empire was a joke, for real. The British also became desperate, the Germans also, the Italians also, so many became desperate, and now they took over Africa. So now they turned on the Hamites. Now, first they were bothering the Judeans, now they turned on the Hamites also. Now the Hamites were subjected by force by the French and British Navy under their rule. Their lands were divided, a lot of things were forced on them. And the Hamites were treated, I won't say far worse, but they were treated worse than the Judeans. The Judeans, they were treated badly on the plantations and all of that. They did them very dirty, but eventually the Judeans became autonomous and an economic power within the Americas. Okay? The Hamites, however, were completely shut down. Okay? That came into full practice around the 1850s. And later around the 1870s it intensified. Shortly after that, you had the First World War, killed many Europeans, killed one another. So the colonial empires that were now dominant worldwide began to fragment, and after the Second World War, it was over. Europe was completely destroyed. But one thing I need to mention: before the Spanish Empire wanted to exclude the Judeans, you had the Haitian Revolution, in which Haitians established their own nation apart from France. This turned into a mass genocide, so it was a complete failure. You can still sense the consequence thereof when you visit the Dominican Republic and the corrupt Republic of Haiti today. But apart from that, the Judeans had their own economy since the 1830s. Now they weren't that unified, but they were active amongst each other. Apart from the heliocentric white Western economy that dominated the world. So you had two economies that were dominant in the world. The Western economy, first through Spain and later also through Britain and France. Don't forget about the Dutch, but the Dutch were more exploitative than that. But okay. And you had the so-called black economy. And in the United States, this black economy flourished. But after the First World War, when Europe was, I won't say fragmented, but when France was completely done with. Britain also had internal struggles, also with Ireland. Well, in the 20s, Tulsa, Oklahoma was burned down by race riots from racist whites against the blacks. Tulsa, Oklahoma was called the Black Wall Street. Look this up for yourself. This crime has been denied a lot by historians. But here's the thing. Those racists who are worshippers of Apollo wanted the white economy to be the only economy. Why? Because they worship the beast, who's a white Greek god, right? There was one big problem with their action. The destruction of Black Wall Street, which caused a big shock in what you could call the black economy. Remember, blacks went all over the place. They even went to Japan. When Japan opened itself in the 1860s, they went to Europe, they went to China. You had those blacks everywhere. And with blacks, I mean those from Judean ethnicity. Okay? They were scattered in Americas. You had them everywhere. You had businesses, they had their own schools, they had their own universities. Man, one of them even established his own navy. So, man, they were active. So when the black economy was attacked, a big hole in the world's economy emerged. And this led to the collapse of the dominant Western economy that dominated the world. The local economies like in China and all of that were still standing kind of, even though they were also fragmenting. After the First World War, the Muslim Empire also, the Islamic Empire or the Ottoman Empire also ceased to exist. So understand that the attack on the black economy was a big mistake. And this attack led to people looking for a new leader. And many whites in America began to support the Nazi Party under the leadership of Adolf Hitler. Hitler had many adherents worldwide amongst whites. So they began to support this guy, thinking if Germany rises back, then at least there won't be any war in Europe and things will go better. Well, Germany did rise back, but the Nazis, man, they had other plans. And that led to the Second World War, and man, Europe was destroyed completely. Man, they began to kill one another and rape one another like crazy. So the violence committed against the blacks earlier in the 1920s, it kind of returned back on the white leaders and stakeholders that allowed it to happen. It wasn't just the incident on Black Wall Street. Even before that, the blacks were constantly targeted by race riots, by mobs, by being lynched and all of that. So the violence turned back on them. So okay, that's that. Then since the 1950s, you had the emergence of human rights and institutions and all of that. And people want to get rid of this racist thing that had been established. But this racist thing was so deep rooted in the world system by then that it would be a challenge to erase it. So political correctness emerged and all of that. But still, a lot of folks were denying the origin of the blacks in Americas, that they were Judeans. Now, there were Hamites amongst them, don't get me wrong, there were also Hamites being transported to the Caribbean, but Judeans were the dominant ones in Western Africa. Their region was Negroland, and still the Negroes in many places are discriminated against. But here's the thing: the Negroes or the blacks, I'm not talking about Hamites now, the blacks, they moved on since 1830 also, and others since 1860s. This also after the 1920s when Black Wall Street was destroyed. They continued. In the 1960s, many blacks demanded acknowledgement by the US government for the crimes committed against them, especially Black Wall Street. Instead, the United States came with this integration policy, which was also adapted by other countries worldwide to integrate all ethnicities. This led to mismanagement in many regions in the United States, including in Illinois, instead of Illinois, and this led to the impoverishment of some regions, and including many regions where blacks were living. That's how many ghettos emerged. There are many white ghettos, Hispanic ghettos, and all of that, but the media often shows black ghettos to give the ideas as if blacks haven't moved on from slavery, as if they still are hanging around the traumas of slavery. Now, the traumas some black communities are in now is the traumas caused by mismanagement in the 1970s. It's nothing to do with slavery directly. Okay? But okay, I wanted to give you this brief history about Negroland and the tribe of Judah because it's important history that's often forgotten, and it's important to know your history. Look, I don't belong to any Hebrew Israelite cult nor any Hebrew Israelite group, so I have no political nor religious ambition in this video. Absolutely not. I just wanted to educate you. Yes, blacks in Americas are from the tribe of Judah. Okay, they are from Israelite descent. Now what you now have in Americas are Judean ethnicities. You don't have the tribe of Judah anymore as in the first century that was located in both the Niger Delta and in Judea. Now you have Judean ethnicities scattered around the Americas. Okay? Now that's only the tribe of Judah. I haven't spoken about the other tribes, tribe of Gad, tribe of Levi, tribe of Benjamin, the tribe of Issachar. I haven't spoken about those other tribes. I only spoke about the Negroes or the Judeans. Okay? Now, it's important to know this history because then you will understand things far better. That's why under white supremacy, they want the Judean ethnicities to think they're inferior. Because if they would realize the economic relevant potential they have, they would act upon it, and if they would do that, there would be nothing left of white supremacy. So the pagan rulers of the world now want to end cultural white supremacy on their own terms, while also empowering the Judean ethnicities into darkness. So many of those Hebrew Israelite movements out there are plots of the shadow government or the pagan rulers of this world. Those are part of an Apollonistic plot to turn the Israelite ethnicities under Antichrist rule. Because the open white supremacy rule can't work anymore. Now cultural white supremacy needs to end. And that's why the pagan rulers of the world turned on the Caucasians or so-called white population of Europe and the United States so that they would let go of cultural white supremacy. But a lot of folks don't want to let go of cultural white supremacy, which isn't working properly anymore. So the pagan rulers are now turning on those people, not because they so-called love the Hamites or Africans or the Judean ethnicities, but because they want to maintain their rule at all costs. They still worship the white god Apollo, that will continue, but they need to do it in a different manner. Now, that was the history of the tribe of Judah. Be at peace.